So, hello everybody, and welcome back. Santiago, I see you're there and ready to go.
Yes.
So let's get straight on with our next session, which is all about looking at whether Open RAN's growth is slower than expected. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So, okay, so for the next, 20 minutes, 20, 25 minutes, depending on questions, I will try to answer the question of this keynote. So, is Open RAN growth slower than expected? It's a tricky question because, of course, I think the answer depends on your expectation. And expectations may depend on your perspective. So, I conscious that maybe if you're an analyst or a journalist, in general, I think for what I've come across, you may have had big expectations on a faster delivery. And if you were a vendor, it's not just about what you expected, but you probably needed a faster take on. So I can only probably speak with my operator's hat on. So I'll try to explain to you what it means for an operator, what expectations we had, and we'll talk about our cycles as well. But anyway, let me start trying to recap what has been going on over the last few months or over the last years in this space. And as I was trying to kind of gather some data points on that, I started by counting how many different suppliers we have just invited to our RFQ that we're launching worldwide. I'll talk about that in a second. But I could count 26 suppliers invited to the RFQ in progress, which is a very rich ecosystem. And reflecting on that, I remember it must have been like 2018, I think the end of 2018 or beginning of 19, when Samsung announced that they were embracing Open RAN. That was quite significant at that point. And I think still to this date, they probably have one of the most complete portfolios on Open RAN. They have software that works on O-RAN for 2G, 4G, and 5G. So that was quite, I think, remarkable in the Open RAN story. But I think a few years later, it was Nokia first in 2022, and then followed by Ericsson last year in 2023 that announced that they were doing Open RAN as well, which is I think is completely remarkable. Even if their plans are aiming at something that looks like 2025-ish, and even if they still have gaps, like for instance 2G is missing from the portfolio, but still, I think is really remarkable. So it's starting to look as a very complete ecosystem with all the main players actually playing part. In parallel...
Forgive me for saying so, some of us journalists and analysts, being of a cynical nature, we kind of think maybe some of those big players really are just have put a different wrap around what they've always done, really, selling big homogeneous sealed units and putting an Open RAN sticker on it.
That's fair. And I think...
and I just wonder from an operator point of view, what you think about that.
Yeah, I don't think things are black or white. So you're entirely right. So it's an oversimplification to say, for instance, whatever, like Nokia is doing Open RAN, Ericsson is doing Open RAN. You need to look into the details to understand what it is they're doing.
Yeah.
There is always some tension in the system between what the customer wants, in this case, the operator, and what the supplier is willing to offer. And in this particular case, protecting their sunken investment and trying not to cannibalize their own revenues with, an evolution, which is completely respectable. But so just give me 5 minutes and we'll touch on that later when we talk about RFQ and the requirements. Let me finish reviewing the ecosystem and what's been going on by just saying that I think it's fair to say practically every tier one operator has now a pilot going on. However, there are much less actually commercial deployment projects in motion. We have one in the UK, 2,500 sites. I think one thing that needs to be understood is the timing of the operator contracts. So operators' deployment work in cycles of typically 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, depends, but typically 5, let's say. And it's at the end of that contract when you plan what's going to happen over the next term. So I think one very good example of that was the news that broke in December about the AT&T deal with Ericsson in the US. And you can debate again to what extent that is open or not, or okay, so there are a lot of details, but I think it gives a boost of credibility and I think push beyond the critical mass the Open RAN ecosystem as a whole. So I think it was an important news and one that speaks about the importance of the cycles as well. And one other interesting data point, if I may, we as Vodafone, we have a very disciplined methodology to benchmark the portfolios of the different vendors and the roadmap of the different vendors, element by element, across all domains in the network, but specifically in the radio. So when we look at like what are the like top 1 or top 2 best radios, as of today, practically in all the portfolio, single bands, dual bands, triple bands, or even massive MIMO, the best radios are actually now O-RAN compliant, which is remarkable. So if you think of Open RAN stuff as a second division, a second category, like not playing in the Premier League, well, I think that's wrong. It's actually the best equipment is starting now to be the Open RAN compliant. Anyway, let me take it back to the Vodafone story, maybe to just tell you what's been going on over the last few years, trying to answer the question. So first of all, and I would say it's fair to say, if you go back to anything that we've said publicly over the last 5 years, you'll see that we've been actually delivering what we said we would do exactly at the time that we said we would deliver it. So answering the question to our expectation and to our plan, we don't think is late or is not growing as we expected it to do, because we are actually delivering exactly the plan that we once had. So if you go back, we announced the RFQ in the UK, I think it was in October 2020 for 2,500 sites. We awarded vendors in June the next year, so 2021. First site on air was later this year. Then the first urban deployment was completed in November 22. We provided acceptance and we started volume rollout in 23. That urban cluster included massive MIMO. So for the first time, I think in the beginning of 2023, and that was quite a milestone for us. Now, to make all this happen, we had to build a team from scratch, a team that would look after Open RAN system integration. Because, well, that's the approach we took as an operator, and also because at the time we were doing this, there weren't too many other options. We also had to put a lot of effort in driving harmonization of a spec, so that we tried to make ourselves sure that what we were doing and we're still doing in the UK is not a flavor that is just our flavor of it, but it's as close as possible to the global specification that every operator is going to be asking and requesting from the suppliers. Otherwise, you just drive fragmentation, and that would be terrible. So for doing that, we are in contact with our fellow operators in Europe to have some kind of regional harmonization. And for driving a global harmonization, it's very important the role that organizations like TIP are playing there, so that they drive that kind of specification harmony across different operators in different regions. Anyway, as of today, if I'm not wrong, we have 38 sites live in the area of Devon in the UK. I have to say that the performance in all KPIs, 4G and 5G, is better than the legacy kit that we are swapping out. Not even equal or better, but better in every single KPI. The power consumption is also better than the legacy we're swapping out and is in line with incumbent architecture. And the total cost of ownership delivered to expectations. So, I would not just give the details, but it was very competitive, and it delivered to what we were expecting. Furthermore, we are working, and I think we've already said that publicly, we are working in integrating the first third-party massive MIMO unit. So more news on that around Mobile World Congress timeframe. So I will not steal my own thunder. So we'll save it for that. But stay tuned because we will announce a few things. And also, I think the next integration of third-party radio will be based on a white box that we designed, and it'll be manufactured by Jabil. We're working on that. So that's also a very interesting initiative. In parallel, we have some more things going on. So in Romania, we have a pilot deployment together with Orange on RAN sharing. That is 10 sites live at the moment. It's called 4G. But the interesting thing is that this will be the first place where we deploy 2G as well in an Open RAN fashion. So it'll follow imminently. We have trials with Nokia in Italy. We have trials with Ericsson and Samsung in Germany. So a lot of activity. Plus, by the way, not to forget, we opened 2 years ago an R&D center for the development of advanced silicon for Open RAN in Malaga.
Yeah,
is going really well as well. Annie?
Okay, so I'm just wondering, talking about integration, and one of the things that I've always wondered about Open RAN is that by breaking out the antenna system into separate parts so that you can get the best of class, you've said that you've got the very best radios, they're all Open RAN compliant. I just wonder, I've always wondered about the integration burden and how much time and how much energy and how standard is standard when it actually comes to putting systems together and you get that perfect interactivity.
Yeah.
Not standard. So
yeah. So a good definition of the interface and a standard for that is an essential condition, is absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient. So you should not expect that because the interface follows the standard, it's plug and play. It doesn't work like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in our case, we built a team of a few hundred people. We build the labs and the infrastructure. And we're taking it patiently. So we are pacing ourselves right now in the UK project. We plan to do one new integration every year. So we take a system and we started on the most difficult part, which is a massive MIMO third-party system. And we integrated that in the year one. And on year two, it'll be a single band white box radio. And we will continue at that pace. Of course, once we have more projects and we are working with more stacks, which are different or complementary to the one that we have in the UK, I think we will be able to increase the speed. But system integration, I think there are different approaches to it that are possible and equally good. You, as an operator, you may think on outsourcing it to a typical system integrator. You may think on, as we did, taking it on yourselves. You may do something in between. I think one of the things that the industry definitely needs and is still missing is an industry practice that solves this problem for everyone, including non-tier one operators. So if you are big enough and ugly enough, maybe you dare to take it on yourself. But what if you're not big enough, or you can't afford it, or you don't want to, or you just don't have the skills? What is the solution that is effective and is not a duplication? I think that question remains outstanding and is one of the things that the industry needs to answer. In my other role representing TIP, I think that organizations like TIP play and can play a big role in answering that question and facilitating that system integration in an affordable manner for everybody. But that answer is still outstanding.
I'm just
So
wondering, does Vodafone feel pressure because you're kind of arguably the most advanced with Open RAN? So I feel like you're under scrutiny from other operators because the first in the market is always, great interest. And I'm also thinking that 3 years ago, I think, you signed the memorandum of understanding in support of Open RAN
yeah,
with Orange, Telefonica Deutsche Telekom, and I think Telecom Italy joined a little further down the line, if I remember rightly.
correct.
And I'm just wondering, I'm not sure how far advanced they are, and while you can't speak for them, I'm sure wouldn't want to. I'm just wondering whether you feel very much. Are you feeling lonely? That's what I'm asking you. Are you lonely?
So that's a fair question. There is no simple answer to that. So first of all, the work that we've done with the other operators in the region was extremely useful. As I said, you can do, even if you are the only one or you are the most advanced one, or if you feel lonely, the important, I think the important point, the most important point is that the spec that you're driving is going to be the same as the operator to your right and the operator to your left. Because if I start deploying in UK and Romania and some trials here and there, and then Telefonica, Deutsche, Orange, or TIM, they start just driving in a completely different direction. Well, you can be sure that that will only fragment the effort and will delay the results. So every operator and each of us, we have our own cycles because each of us, we are in a different contract that we procured ourselves that expire in a different date. So AT&T did what they did in December because their contract was already 5 years old and they need to renew it. Now we are launching an RFQ that is 170,000 sites worldwide because our contract is expiring in 2025, 1 year from now. So we are going to renegotiate that. And in the renegotiation, there'll be, of course, changes and the market share will be shaken up. So there'll be new players. And we were very clear when we spoke 2 years ago publicly, and we said our ambition is for the outcome of that tender, that competitive tender, to include at least 30% of Open RAN for Europe. We said that, and we were very deliberate in saying that. We keep that ambition. And as of today, as we're launching that RFQ, as we speak, we still have the ambition to see an outcome that has us doing at least 30% of Europe with Open RAN. Now, what is Open RAN is also a very good question, because maybe different operators would just call Open RAN different things. In our case, we're very clear. So Open RAN is off-the-shelf server with open fronthaul, with open interfaces to SMO and RIC, integration of third-party radios, including massive MIMO, 2G, 4G, and 5G, FDD, TDD, and in the case of Africa, 3G in addition, because there is no way that you can actually not do 3G in Africa, right? So that for us is Open RAN, which is what you expect. But one new thing, I think to your point that we are doing is that on the, say, single RAN part of the deal, because obviously if our ambition is to do 30% with Open RAN, well, implicitly our ambition is also to keep 70% with single RAN. So we have included open fronthaul as a new addition to our requirements on the single RAN part. We still call it single RAN and we still see it as a single RAN, but we think having an open fronthaul is a very, very good flexibility tool that we want to leverage for sure.
Could you just talk a little bit more about that fronthaul requirement?
Yeah. So if you go back to like why are we doing this? So we, as operators or as an industry, why Open RAN? If I give my 2 cents on that, the first and biggest reason and driver to do Open RAN is supplier diversity.
Yeah.
So in some, so if you simplify a bit the landscape, the vendors that we've been using in the cycle that is now ending are limited to 3. And in some markets, actually, one of them is challenged geopolitically. You can't use it anymore, which actually reduced the ecosystem to two. So it's urgent that we find like diversity in the supply chain. And one way of doing it would, could have been to just add one more name to the pool or two. But Open RAN actually solves the problem in a much more elegant way, because in one go, it adds not one, not two, but 26 kind of names in an ecosystem that is much more, like, is richer, more diverse, and more resilient. So that is the main driver, followed by, of course, the flexibility that you have, particularly on the radio, to increase competition in an area, if you think of the radio hardware, that actually captures about 50% of your wallet share. So be it because it is the bigger consumption in energy, or just is the biggest capex in a base station. It doesn't matter. So most of the money goes direction radio, but the radio in Single RAN is captive. So once you select the software, the radio is automatically dictated. Now, interestingly enough, if your contract is going to last for, say, 5 years, there'll be a lot of evolution on the radio with state-of-the-art silicon on the PAs, which is much more efficient, with more capable radios, with multiband radios coming, whatever kind of advancements that you could not see when you signed the contract. So it doesn't matter how well you negotiated. When the new equipment comes, you are captive of the supplier you chose, and you want to use that equipment, but you have limited room for negotiating unless you open the front horn.
I'm just wondering as well, with 5GSA, and that's been much delayed, that hasn't rolled out as fast as we expected. Mm-hmm. And I think there were fewer deployments in 2023 than there were in 2022, according to figures I read from Ookla, I think, last week. How do you think that's had an impact? And has that had an impact on Vodafone and Open RAN?
I think what there is a global slowdown on CapEx in general, not necessarily limited to 5GSA because it's not interesting, or even not limited to just the wider 5G because it's not delivering to its promise. No, it is. 5GSA is interesting for a variety of reasons. I think the previous panel was discussing about that, and it was a very good discussion. The same as 5G is delivering to its promises, that's not the problem. The problem is the revenue growth is difficult for operators because they, as much as the traffic is going up, the revenue is not following the same trajectory. So it reaches a point, and it depends, from one region to another, but everyone reaches a point on which you can't sustain like this level of investment if the revenue is not coming. That slows down 5GSA, that slows down 5G, and that slows down Open RAN growth, not because it's not interesting or not because it's not delivering to its promises, but because the overall CapEx intensity is going down globally. Now, some regions are worse than others. So if you compare Asia and North America to Europe, well, it's quite embarrassing. But of course, there are reasons for that, right? So from the money that operators had to pay for the spectrum to the how like functional the market is, or how broken it is, in terms of the number of players and the cost to entry.
So you mean it's embarrassing in Europe that we're behind Asia and North America?
Correct.
Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons for Europe to be behind in the deployment of 5G, which, by the way, has negative consequences on the rest of the economy of the region. So it's a very serious problem, but it drives the slowdown of everything from 5GSA to Open RAN to 5G.
Okay. So, how are you seeing the future? How do you think the situation is going to progress? Are you expecting things to speed up this year, or do you think it might be next year because of the situation you've just described with the depressed capex globally because of inflation and blah blah blah, all the rest of it?
I think there's going to be a perceived acceleration of Open RAN. So unfortunately, I don't think the 5G rollout or the revenue problem or the market dysfunction has a solution coming this year or next year. It'll take more time. But in terms of perceived speed of Open RAN, I think what we saw in AT&T in December, that was dictated by AT&T procurement cycles.
Yeah.
We will see more of in this year. Like our RFQ is out, and there'll be an outcome before the year ends, and then whatever that is, just we'll talk about it, and we'll say, oh, so there is this much Open RAN happening finally. Is it because we postponed it? No, we always had this plan because we know the contract is expiring in 2025. Therefore, it's the right time for us. However, the perception will be that Open RAN is accelerating. Now, more operators will have cycles ending this year and next year. And that will drive, I think, the perception of an accelerated growth of Open RAN, which you can summarize just by thinking that the second half of this decade, 25 to 30, will be the decade of Open RAN, which is probably right. And furthermore, if you ask me, I think that continuing that, Open RAN will probably become a standard in 6G by default. And then it will no longer be an option.
Okay. So do you feel that your viewpoint on some things has changed? You're talking about coming to the end of cycles in 2025. Do you feel that your thinking has changed, or that you've learned a lot, that when you go into the next procurement cycle, your requirements will have changed or advanced, or what do you think?
I think requirements always evolve. So the requirements of today will not be the same as the requirement a year from now, 2 years from now. I think it's the direction of travel that matters. And I think the direction of travel has been the same over the last few years. It's just the more you know and the more capable the technology is, the more you can stretch your requirements in terms of everything that matters, from energy efficiency to power to capacity to everything else.
And do you feel like the vendors are moving in the right direction with you? Seems to have been what you've implied all the way through the conversation this morning, that you do feel the vendors are moving along with you. I mean, do you feel like they're keeping up enough?
I think so. I think the whole thing was perceived more slow at the beginning when before Samsung came on board. Then on the timeline I described, that made a change because it was the first big name joining. Then there was some, I think, empty kind of space until Nokia decided to embrace it. That precipitated Ericsson. So all in all, I think it's a richer ecosystem now. Now, you could argue they could have done it more quickly, but you have to also respect that they need to decide on their own timing. It's like diesel kind of car manufacturers deciding when they want to produce hybrid or electrical cars. You need to respect their business cycle because it's a transformation that is not simple at all. So I think I'm optimistic. I think it's taking some time, but as I said at the beginning, from an operator perspective, particularly this one who was focused on delivering Spring 6, as we call it, the RFQ that is just out, in this time, things are working as we expected them to.
Okay, so what I look forward to doing is following up with you in a little while, maybe next year, maybe sooner, and see how the story is evolving, because I think, like you, that there will be a perceived acceleration with Open RAN. And I also have been waiting. I don't know what you think about this, but just like Samsung's entry into the market had quite a big impact, I keep wondering who else is out there and going to get involved, because it seems to me the thing about Open RAN is there is the possibility of market entry in a way that there wasn't before. That, as you've said, is kind of the point.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, yeah. So that's one for us to follow up in a year's time. I'm sure that it'll be a very good conversation.
Well, in the meantime, I'd just like to thank you for your insights. Really useful. Thank you ever so much. We will see you anon, whenever that is. Thank you very much
good.
indeed.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.